Commander Daniel Price stood at the large window of the Earth Defense Station Aurora and looked out into the darkness of space. Beyond the red surface of Mars, he could see them gathering. The ships of the Galactic Council were arriving one by one and forming a pattern that looked like a threat. Daniel had been a soldier for 15 years, and he knew what a battle formation looked like when he saw one. His hands were steady as he held his coffee cup, but his mind was racing through all the possible outcomes of what was about to happen. For 20 years, humanity had followed the rules that the Galactic Council had imposed on Earth. The Council was made up of 12 alien species that had been traveling through space for thousands of years before humans even invented the wheel. When Earth finally developed faster than light travel and reached out to the stars, the Council had been waiting. They offered humanity a place in galactic civilization, but the offer came with a price. Earth had to pay tribute in resources and technology. Humanity had to accept limits on how far they could expand and what kind of weapons they could build. Worst of all, Earth had to ask permission before developing any new technology that the Council deemed too advanced. The Council called it protection and guidance. They said younger species needed to be supervised or they would destroy themselves. Daniel called it slavery with better marketing. For 2 decades, humanity had played the role of the obedient child, while the elder species took what they wanted from Earth. They took rare minerals from the asteroid belt. They took genetic samples and cultural artifacts. They took human scientists to work on Council projects, and those scientists rarely came back. Earth gave, and the Council took, and humanity was told to be grateful for the opportunity. Everything changed 6 months ago when Dr. Alan Foster and his team at the Lunar Research Facility made a breakthrough. They developed a quantum drive that could move a ship across vast distances in seconds, rather than hours or days. It was pure human innovation built from theories that no alien species had shared. For the first time since joining the galactic community, humanity had created something that was truly their own, and it was better than anything the Council had. The quantum drive was faster and more efficient than any propulsion system in known space. Daniel remembered the day the Council found out about the quantum drive. Ambassador Zethrin had arrived at Earth with an entire diplomatic fleet. The ambassador was a tall creature with blue skin and 4 arms who spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Zethrin had smiled with too many teeth and explained that the quantum drive violated the Technology Restriction Treaty that Earth had signed. The drive had to be dismantled immediately, and all research data had to be turned over to the Council for safekeeping. When President Helen Carter asked why the technology was restricted, Zethrin said it was for the safety of the galaxy. When the president asked what would happen if Earth refused, the ambassador stopped smiling and said the Council would be forced to take action. Daniel turned away from the window as the communication system came to life throughout the station. Every screen on Aurora flickered and then showed the same image. President Helen Carter sat at her desk in the White House, looking calm and determined. She wore a simple blue suit, and her gray hair was pulled back in a style that made her look like someone's grandmother. But her eyes were steel. Behind her, the flags of Earth and the United Nations hung on the wall. The president looked directly into the camera and began to speak. She said that humanity had tried to work within the galactic system. Earth had paid its dues and followed the rules and hoped that cooperation would lead to true partnership. Instead, the Council had treated humanity as a resource to be exploited, rather than a civilization to be respected. The demand to surrender the quantum drive was the final insult. The technology represented decades of human effort and ingenuity, and Earth would not hand it over to species that wanted to keep humanity weak and dependent. Therefore, effective immediately, Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Council. All treaties were void. All agreements were canceled. Council representatives had 24 hours to leave Earth and all human-controlled territory. Any Council ship that remained after the deadline would be considered hostile. The station erupted in noise as people reacted to the announcement. Some cheered while others looked terrified. Daniel felt something he had not felt in years. He felt hope mixed with fear, and underneath it all a sense of relief that the pretending was finally over. Earth was taking a stand, and whatever happened next would at least be honest. The Council's response came within an hour. The fleet beyond Mars began to move toward Earth. Ships that had been holding positions suddenly activated their engines and started accelerating on an intercept course. Warning shots blazed across the darkness near the lunar colonies. Bright flashes of energy weapons lit up the space around the moon like fireworks. The message was clear. The Council expected Earth to back down immediately. They were used to younger species folding under pressure. Every time in the past when a species challenged Council authority, the elders had simply applied force until the rebellion collapsed. But this time was different. President Carter gave a single command, and hidden shipyards across the solar system came to life. Facilities that had been built in secret over the past 6 months revealed themselves. Doors opened in asteroids and on the dark sides of moons. Humanity had been preparing for this moment ever since the Council demanded the quantum drive. If Earth was going to break free, it needed the strength to back up its words. Hundreds of new warships emerged from concealment, each one equipped with quantum drives and weapons that the Council had never seen. Before Captain Lisa Morgan was among the first to launch from the hidden base on the far side of the moon. Her ship, the Defender, hummed with power as the quantum drive activated. The sensation was like nothing she had ever experienced. One moment she was near the moon, and the next she was thousands of kilometers away, positioned behind the advancing Council fleet. Her weapons officer looked at her with wide eyes, and she gave the order to fire. The battle had begun, and humanity was no longer asking for permission. The battle lasted only 4 hours, but the shockwave it created would spread across the galaxy for years to come. Captain Lisa Morgan returned to Earth with her ship intact, and her crew exhausted but alive. The Council fleet had retreated in complete disorder, with nearly half their vessels damaged or destroyed. Human casualties were minimal. The quantum drives had given Earth's forces an advantage that the Council simply could not match. Ships that could appear anywhere in the battle space at any moment turned traditional fleet tactics into obsolete theory. The Council had expected an easy victory and instead received a humiliating defeat. News traveled fast in the galactic community. Within days, every species in known space had seen the footage of human warships dancing around Council vessels like wolves circling slow prey. On the industrial world of Kareth Prime, workers gathered in the factory common areas to watch the recordings on screens that usually displayed production quotas. The Kareth people had labored for the Council for 300 years, mining heavy metals and assembling components for Council technology. They had been told that the Council's power was absolute and that resistance was impossible. Now they watched human ships prove that the Council could bleed. Admiral Carl Davis sat in his office at Earth Defense Command reading reports that kept getting more interesting. His intelligence officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster, had compiled data from monitoring stations across the solar system and beyond. The information painted a picture of a galaxy that was starting to shake itself apart. 17 worlds had reported uprisings or protests against Council authority. Species that had never questioned their place in the hierarchy were suddenly demanding answers. Why did they have to follow Council laws? Why did they have to pay tribute? Why could they not develop their own technology without permission? The questions were simple, but they struck at the foundation of everything the Council had built. Lieutenant Foster pointed to a star map that showed the locations of reported unrest. The pattern was clear. Worlds that had been suppressed the longest were reacting the strongest. Species that had been forced into servitude were looking at Earth's example and wondering if they too could break free. The Council had maintained order through fear and the illusion of invincibility. Earth had shattered that illusion in a single afternoon. Now the carefully constructed galactic order was beginning to crack like old glass under pressure. On the Council capital world of Zenthar, the emergency session had been going for 3 days without a break. High Counselor Vorn stood at the center of the great chamber, surrounded by representatives from the member species. His people were ancient and had ruled the Council since its founding 2,000 years ago. Vorn had never known defeat, and he refused to accept what had happened at Earth as anything other than a temporary setback. He demanded immediate action against humanity. He wanted every available ship mobilized for a full-scale invasion of the solar system. Earth had to be crushed completely, or the entire Council system would collapse. But other voices in the chamber urged caution. The representative from Dracon stood and announced that his people were withdrawing their fleet from Council control. The unrest on Dracon's colonies required all available military forces for security purposes. The representative from Velcor made a similar announcement. Then the representative from Thurion. One by one, species began pulling their ships away from Council command, citing internal problems that needed attention. The Council fleet that had seemed so powerful just days ago was dissolving before Vorn's eyes. The monolithic unity that had held the Council together was fracturing under the weight of its own corruption. High Counselor Vorn slammed his appendage against the podium and declared that any species withdrawing support would be considered in violation of their treaty obligations. The threats rang hollow in the vast chamber. Several representatives simply walked out. The Council's power had always depended on everyone believing it was unstoppable. Once that belief cracked, the whole structure began to fall apart. Vorn was watching his empire die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Back on Earth, President Helen Carter stood before the United Nations Assembly and addressed the gathered delegates. She knew that many people were afraid of what humanity had unleashed. The galaxy had been stable under Council rule, even if that stability came at the cost of freedom. Now chaos was spreading, and Earth bore responsibility for lighting the fuse. The President acknowledged the fear, but she also spoke about the alternative. The Council's system was built on the suppression of younger species. It was designed to keep certain civilizations powerful while keeping others weak. Earth's act of defiance had not created the problems in the galaxy. It had simply revealed the rot that already existed beneath the surface. She promised that humanity would defend itself against any aggression, but Earth would not become the new oppressor. Humanity had no desire to build an empire or to rule over other species. The President called for a new approach to galactic relations based on mutual respect and cooperation between equals. Some delegates applauded, while others looked skeptical. Words were easy, but actions would tell the real story. Out on the edges of civilized space, Merchant Captain Kevin Hayes sat in the cockpit of his cargo ship and watched his livelihood disappear. The trade routes that had connected thousands of worlds were collapsing as the Council's economic system fell apart. Ships that normally carried goods between systems were now stuck in port, because insurance companies would not cover voyages through unstable regions. Banking networks were failing as member species stopped honoring Council currency. Supply chains that had taken centuries to build were breaking in a matter of weeks. Kevin had been hauling cargo for 12 years, and he had never seen anything like this. The galaxy's economy was in free fall, and nobody knew where the bottom might be. Some merchants saw opportunity in the chaos. Goods that were common in one system were becoming rare and valuable in another. Prices were fluctuating wildly. A smart trader could make a fortune or lose everything in a single run. Kevin checked his fuel levels and his cargo manifest and made a decision. He would take the risk. The old safe routes were gone anyway, so he might as well try the dangerous ones. He plotted a course toward a system that had just declared independence from the Council and fired up his engines. The galaxy was changing, and he would change with it or die trying. 3 months passed since Earth's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy continued to tear itself apart. Ambassador Claire Bennett sat in her shuttle as it descended toward the surface of Norvax. The planet below was covered in purple vegetation and silver cities that gleamed in the light of twin suns. The Norvax people had been part of the Council for 800 years, but they had never been equal members. They provided resources and labor while the elder species made decisions and took profits. Now the Norvax leadership had sent a message to Earth requesting a formal alliance. Claire's mission was to determine if such an alliance served humanity's interests while also helping a species that desperately needed protection. The Norvax Chancellor greeted Claire at the landing platform with traditional gestures of respect. The Chancellor was tall and thin with smooth gray skin and large eyes that seemed to see everything. He led Claire through the capital city, explaining that his people admired what Earth had done. The Norvax had dreamed of independence for generations, but never had the courage to break free. They feared Council retribution, and they lacked the military strength to defend themselves. Now they saw an opportunity. If Earth would stand with them, perhaps they could finally be free. The Chancellor asked Claire if humanity would help protect Norvax from the Council's inevitable revenge. Claire chose her words carefully. She explained that Earth did not want to build an empire or become the new overlord of smaller species. Humanity had fought for its own freedom and understood the desire for independence. However, Earth also could not defend every species in the galaxy that wanted to break away from the Council. The resources simply did not exist. She asked the Chancellor what Norvax could offer in an alliance beyond the moral satisfaction of helping others. The question was blunt but necessary. Earth needed partners, not dependents. The Chancellor took Claire to a research facility hidden beneath the capital city. Inside, she saw something that made her breath catch. The Norvax scientists had been secretly developing a new type of energy shield that could absorb and redirect incoming fire. The technology was remarkable and potentially revolutionary for ship defense. The Chancellor explained that Norvax had always been creative, but the Council had forbidden them from military research. Now they were willing to share everything with Earth in exchange for protection. Claire immediately sent an encrypted message back to Earth Command recommending the alliance. This was exactly the kind of partnership that could benefit both species. The negotiations continued for 2 weeks. Claire and the Norvax leadership worked out the details of a mutual defense treaty. Earth would provide military support if Norvax was attacked. In return, Norvax would share their shield technology and allow Earth to establish a small naval base in their system. Both sides would maintain their sovereignty and independence. It was not a perfect agreement, but it was fair, and that was what mattered. Claire prepared to return to Earth to present the treaty for final approval. Then everything went wrong. The Council strike force arrived without warning. 12 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Norvax system and immediately began moving toward the planet. Claire watched from the Norvax command center as the enemy vessels ignored all attempts at communication. They had not come to talk. High Counselor Vorn's face appeared on every screen, broadcasting a message to all nearby systems. He declared that Norvax was in open rebellion against lawful authority and would be punished as an example to others who might consider betraying the Council. The attack began within minutes. Council ships opened fire on military installations across Norvax. Bright lances of energy struck defensive platforms and command centers. Explosions bloomed across the surface as buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble in seconds. The Norvax defense fleet launched from orbital stations, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Council vessels destroyed half the defending ships in the first 10 minutes. The attack was brutal and efficient, designed to break Norvax resistance completely. Claire stood helpless in the command center, watching a civilization being murdered because they dared to reach for freedom. The Chancellor turned to Claire with desperation in his large eyes. He asked if Earth would really come. The treaty was not even finalized yet. Humanity had no legal obligation to help. Claire sent an emergency transmission to Earth, knowing it might be too late. The quantum communication system allowed instant contact, but even if Earth responded immediately, it would take time for ships to arrive. She told the Chancellor to evacuate as many people as possible and to keep fighting. Help was coming. She had to believe that. 6 hours later, human warships emerged from quantum jumps at the edge of the Norvax system. Commander Jack Porter led the rapid response fleet consisting of 20 vessels equipped with the latest weapons and shields. He had received Claire's distress call and immediately mobilized every available ship. The journey from Earth to Norvax normally took 3 weeks, but quantum drives reduced it to hours. Jack looked at the tactical display showing the Council ships still bombarding the planet below. His orders were clear. Protect Norvax and drive off the attackers. He gave the command to engage. The Council forces detected the human ships too late. Jack's fleet used quantum jumps to appear directly behind the enemy formation. Human vessels opened fire before the Council ships could turn to face them. The new Norvax shields that Claire had seen were already installed on several human ships as a field test. The shields worked perfectly, absorbing enemy fire and redirecting the energy back at the attackers. Council vessels that had been hunting Norvax defenders suddenly found themselves fighting for survival. 3 enemy ships were destroyed in the opening minutes. The rest tried to retreat, but quantum drives gave the humans a decisive speed advantage. Jack ordered his ships to pursue. The Council had come to Norvax to make an example, and now humanity would make a counterexample. Every Council ship was either destroyed or captured. Not a single enemy vessel escaped to report back to Zenthar. The battle ended with a complete human victory. Norvax was saved and the message was sent across the galaxy. Any species that allied with Earth would have Earth's protection. The Council could no longer attack the weak without consequence. High Counselor Vorn had tried to reassert dominance and instead handed humanity another propaganda victory. The ripples continued spreading outward. The victory at Norvax changed everything. Within weeks, 43 different species sent diplomatic messages to Earth requesting protection or alliance. President Helen Carter found herself managing a coalition that nobody had planned for. Earth had wanted independence, not responsibility for half the galaxy. But the requests kept coming, and turning them all away felt wrong. Species that had suffered under council rule for centuries were reaching out for help, and humanity had the power to provide it. The question was whether Earth should become the protector of the weak or focus purely on its own interests. Carter called an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss the growing crisis. Meanwhile, High Counselor Vorn was consolidating power on Zenthar. He had quietly eliminated political rivals who questioned his aggressive approach. Council members who advocated for negotiation with Earth mysteriously disappeared or resigned under pressure. Vorn filled their positions with loyalists who shared his vision of restoring Council dominance through overwhelming force. He began mobilizing what remained of the Council's military strength for one massive strike. Intelligence reports suggested the Council was developing new weapons specifically designed to counter human quantum technology. Scientists were studying wreckage from destroyed Council ships to understand how the humans moved so fast. Vorn was preparing for total war. General Paul Grant reviewed the defensive preparations around Earth's solar system. After Norvax, he knew the Council would eventually come for humanity's home. The outer defensive ring around Jupiter had been reinforced with new weapons platforms and shield generators. Mars hosted 3 full battle groups ready to intercept any attacking force. The asteroid belt was filled with hidden gun emplacements and sensor stations. Earth itself had planetary shields that could withstand sustained bombardment. Grant was confident the defenses were strong, but he also knew that confidence could be dangerous. The Council had been underestimated before, and that mistake could not be repeated. The attack came on a Tuesday morning without any warning. Council stealth ships breached the outer sensor perimeter using some kind of cloaking technology that human scanners had never encountered. They released swarms of automated weapons platforms that immediately began targeting defensive installations. The platforms were small and fast-moving in erratic patterns that made them difficult to hit. They were clearly designed based on captured human technology. The battle stations around Jupiter took heavy damage before they could mount an effective response. Alarms screamed across every military facility in the solar system. General Grant activated the emergency command protocols from his bunker in Colorado. Reports flooded in from across the solar system, painting a picture of coordinated chaos. Council forces were hitting multiple targets simultaneously, stretching human defenses dangerously thin. The lunar colonies reported ground invasions with Council troops landing in force. Mars was under siege with enemy warships bombarding the orbital stations. Supply lines were being cut. Communication networks were being jammed. This was not a raid or a punitive strike. This was an invasion designed to destroy humanity's ability to fight back. The Council had committed everything to this attack, betting the entire war on one overwhelming blow. On Mars, Colonel Lisa Chen commanded the defense of Olympus City against Council drop troops. The enemy forces came down in armored pods that crashed through the dome shields in dozens of locations. Council soldiers poured into the streets wearing combat suits and carrying weapons that fired superheated plasma. They fought with desperate intensity, knowing that failure meant the end of Council power in the galaxy. Lisa's Marines met them block by block, using the city terrain to their advantage. Barricades went up at major intersections. Snipers took positions in tall buildings. The humans turned Olympus City into a maze of death for the invaders. Lisa coordinated her forces from a mobile command post that moved constantly to avoid enemy targeting. She watched the tactical displays showing red icons representing enemy units pushing deeper into the city. Her troops were holding, but barely. Ammunition was running low. Casualties were mounting. She called for air support, but the orbital situation was too chaotic. Every available ship was engaged in the space battle above. The ground forces were on their own. Lisa made a hard decision. She ordered controlled detonations in the eastern sector, collapsing several buildings to block the main enemy advance. Dozens of civilians died in the explosions, but it stopped 300 Council troops from reaching the city center. War was full of terrible choices. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Carl Davis commanded the home fleet against the main Council battle group. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, with ships burning on both sides. Human quantum drives allowed for rapid repositioning, but the Council's numbers were overwhelming. They had brought everything. Hundreds of warships filled the space around Earth like angry insects. Davis ordered his captains to use hit-and-run tactics. Jump in and fire, then jump out before the enemy could return fire. The strategy worked, but it was exhausting. Ships could only make so many quantum jumps before their drives needed to cool down. The enemy knew this and was trying to wear down the human fleet through sheer persistence. The Abraham Lincoln took a direct hit that punched through her shields and tore open 3 decks. The Roosevelt lost main power and went dark, drifting helplessly while her crew fought to restore systems. The Kennedy exploded in a ball of fire, taking 200 souls with her. Davis watched his fleet being ground down ship by ship. Earth's orbital infrastructure was suffering catastrophic damage. Debris filled the space lanes, making navigation dangerous. The shipyards at L5 were burning. The Council was not trying to conquer Earth anymore. They were trying to cripple humanity so completely that recovery would take generations. Then Dr. Alan Foster deployed his experimental weapon. The quantum disruption pulse spread out from a satellite hidden among Earth's orbital debris. Every ship in the battle zone suddenly went dark as their quantum systems crashed. Human vessels, Council vessels, everything stopped working. The silence lasted for exactly 4 minutes. In those crucial minutes, Earth's ground-based defenses recalibrated and locked onto every disabled enemy ship. When systems came back online, the human ships recovered faster because their quantum drives were newer and more robust. The Council fleet found itself facing fully operational planetary defenses and a human fleet that was damaged but functional. Davis gave the order to press the attack. The Council ships began a chaotic retreat, jumping away in disorder. Earth had held, but the cost was terrible. Thousands were dead. The infrastructure that supported millions was shattered. Victory felt like survival, nothing more. The failed invasion marked the end of the Galactic Council as a unified power. Within 3 weeks of the defeat at Earth, member species began formally withdrawing from the organization one after another. The Council's core worlds watched helplessly as their empire dissolved. First, the industrial worlds left, taking their manufacturing capacity with them. Then the agricultural world stopped shipping food. The financial centers declared independence and froze Council assets. Species that had been paying tribute for centuries simply stopped paying. High Counselor Vorn tried to hold things together with threats and promises, but nobody believed him anymore. The Council's military was shattered. Its economy was collapsing. Its authority existed only on paper. President Helen Carter stood on the observation deck of Gateway Station and looked out at the diplomatic vessels gathered around the new facility. Ships from 47 different species floated in formation, waiting for the conference to begin. Gateway had been constructed at the edge of Earth's solar system over the past 6 months, using resources and labor from a dozen allied worlds. The station was enormous, spanning several kilometers, and housing diplomatic quarters for hundreds of species. It represented a different vision for galactic cooperation. No tribute, no subordination. Every species maintained complete sovereignty. The coalition existed purely for mutual defense and free trade. The first Galactic Assembly meeting began with representatives filing into the Great Chamber. Unlike the old Council chamber on Zenthar, this one had no raised platforms or positions of dominance. Every delegate sat at the same level in a circular arrangement. President Carter opened the session by welcoming everyone and laying out the principles that would guide their cooperation. She spoke about respect between equals and the right of every species to develop without interference. She acknowledged that the galaxy was more chaotic now than it had been under Council rule. The old system had provided stability, even if that stability came through oppression. The new system offered freedom, but freedom was messy and dangerous. The delegate from Norvac stood and thanked Earth for saving his world. He pledged his people's full support to the coalition. The delegate from Karath Prime spoke about how his people had thrown off their chains after watching humanity's example. Other delegates shared similar stories. Species after species explained how Earth's defiance had inspired them to seek their own independence. Not everyone was grateful, though. The delegate from Paxor warned that the coalition was just another empire in the making. He questioned whether humanity would truly remain an equal partner, or whether Earth would eventually demand the same obedience the Council had. Carter listened to the criticism and acknowledged the concern. She promised that the coalition's charter would include strict limits on any single species gaining too much power. Actions would prove Earth's intentions better than words. Back on Zenthar, the remaining Council members met in emergency session to discuss their future. High Counselor Vorn had been arrested by his own people and was awaiting trial for leading them into disaster. The new Council leadership consisted of moderates who understood that the old ways were finished. They voted to dissolve the Galactic Council officially and to sue for peace with Earth and its allies. Ambassador Claire Bennett led the peace negotiations, which took place on neutral ground at Gateway Station. The talks lasted 3 months and resulted in the Zenthar Accords. The former Council worlds would maintain their independence but could no longer claim authority over other species. There would be no war reparations because the galaxy needed to rebuild, not seek revenge. Both sides agreed to respect each other's territorial boundaries and to establish trade relations on equal terms. Not everyone accepted the new reality peacefully. Pirate fleets began operating in the power vacuum left by the Council's collapse. Warlords claimed control over isolated systems. Rogue military units from the old Council forces became mercenaries, selling their services to whoever paid. The space lanes that had been safe for centuries became dangerous as convoys were attacked and colonies were raided. The galaxy was experiencing growing pains as it adjusted to a system without a central authority. Captain Kevin Hayes found himself in the middle of this chaos as he tried to maintain his merchant roots. Kevin's cargo ship was traveling through a disputed region when 3 pirate vessels appeared on his sensors. They demanded he stop and surrender his cargo. Kevin had dealt with pirates before and knew that surrendering usually meant death. He opened a channel to other merchant ships in the area and proposed they band together for defense. Within an hour, 12 cargo vessels had formed a convoy with Kevin leading them. The pirates attacked expecting easy prey but found themselves facing organized resistance. The merchants used their ships as weapons, ramming pirate vessels and creating debris fields that blocked pursuit. 2 pirate ships were destroyed and the 3rd retreated. Kevin's convoy made it through, but the incident showed how dangerous the galaxy had become. The coalition responded by establishing patrol routes and offering escort services to independent merchants. Species contributed ships to a joint security force that hunted pirates and protected trade lanes. It was not perfect, but it was better than nothing. The galaxy was learning to police itself without a central authority. Free trade flourished in some regions while others remained dangerous. Entrepreneurs found opportunities in the chaos. New shipping companies formed. New colonies were established in systems that had been forbidden under Council law. Humanity expanded beyond its solar system for the first time in 20 years, founding settlements on worlds that offered resources or strategic position. 5 years after Earth's withdrawal, Commander Daniel Price retired from military service. He had spent his entire adult life as a soldier, and now it was time to do something else. He bought a small house in Colorado with a view of the mountains and spent his days reading and thinking about everything that had happened. Sometimes young officers would visit him asking about the early days of the revolution. Daniel would tell them stories about the battle at Mars and the desperate defense of Earth. He always ended with the same lesson. Freedom was not free and it was not neat. The galaxy under Council rule had been orderly but stagnant. The galaxy after the Council was chaotic but alive with possibility. Daniel would sit on his porch at night and look up at the stars. Human ships were out there exploring regions that had been forbidden for 2 decades. Scientists were making discoveries without asking permission. Artists were creating works that expressed purely human perspectives. Children were growing up knowing that their species bowed to no one. The cost had been high. Thousands had died in the war. The solar system's infrastructure had taken years to rebuild, but the alternative would have been worse. A slow death of the spirit as humanity remained forever subordinate to older species. Daniel believed they had made the right choice even with all the chaos and uncertainty. The universe was vast and full of possibilities, and now humanity was free to explore it on their own terms. That was worth any price.